Good morning, everyone, and welcome to West Devon Development Management and Licensing Committee, the first of this new council. So welcome all. First, we have apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Councillor Jury, and Councillor Kimber is substituting for him, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Mann.
Sorry. I was the chair of the committee that considered 408722 HHO on Parkwood Road at the time that it was considered by the Town Council. But I do not think I'm predetermined.
Thank you. Item 3, items requiring urgent attention. None have been brought to my notice. Item 4, confirmation of minutes. These are the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February 2023. Are there any comments on those meetings, or can I take them as a true record of the meeting? Okay, thank you very much. On then to planning applications, and the first planning application we're considering today is 408722, 61 Parkwood Road, Tavistock, householder application for alterations to existing building, including rear side extension and roof conversion. And we have one registered speaker for this application. But let me first turn to the planning officer. I'm sorry, I meant at the beginning of the meeting for us to introduce ourselves, so I'll just pause there and we'll go round the table introducing ourselves, starting with Councillor Mott.
Councillor Mott, Bridistow Ward.
Councillor Wakeham, Hadley Ward.
Councillor Jeff Moody, Tavistock North Ward. I'm the ward member who called in this planning application. I have not predetermined the application and I will not make a decision until I've heard all the arguments. You hear me? Sorry.
Councillor Cunningham, Buckland Monacorum Ward.
Councillor Steve Guthrie, Drew Stainton Ward.
Councillor Ursula Mann, Tavistock North.
Councillor Leach, Oakhampton North.
Councillor Kimber, Hatherley.
Claire Stewart, Principal Planning Officer for West Devon Borough Council.
Jacqueline Houselander, Head of Development Management for West Devon Borough Council.
Richard Edel, Chair of this committee and Ward Member for Buckland Monacorum.
Councillor Southcott, Bridistow Ward and Vice Chair.
Cathy Hall, Democratic Services Officer for West Devon.
Good morning, David Fairbairn, Head of Legal Services and Monitoring Officer.
Graham Lawrence, Senior Planning Officer, Heritage.
Thank you very much. So back to the planning application and the first planning application, 61 Parkwood Road. Over to the planning officer, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, okay. So, application at Household Works at 61 Parkwood Road, Tavistock. Application site is shown hatched in red. Members who were present at the site visit will recall application site is part of a pair of semi-detached properties that are located within the Tavistock Conservation Area and the World Heritage Site. Aerial photograph identifying the application site with a little red circle so you can see its position in context. And this next plan was taken from the Tavistock Conservation Area appraisal. All of the area that you see sort of within the plan is within the World Heritage Site and the conservation area. The red identified buildings are those that are individually listed, and the ones identified in green, which includes the application property, which is this one up here. The ones identified in green are buildings identified as having a positive contribution to the conservation area within the conservation area appraisal and management plan. So this is the site plan as existing, showing the main form of the principal dwelling, which is 2-storey, and additions to the rear. There's an existing porch on this side here. That's the nearest neighbouring property affected by the proposed development there. Floor plans of the property as existing. And here are the proposed floor plans. So points to note, the 2-storey element of extension to the rear of the property here, and then the side extension shown there, and then again on the roof plan there. Elevations of the property as existing. So here, this is the south elevation, is the principal elevation facing onto Parkwood Road. The east elevation is the existing elevation facing towards the neighbour. And then the north elevation is the existing rear elevation of the property. And you will note that there are currently no windows in that gable end elevation there, which is important to note in terms of the considerations around neighbour amenity. Here we have the proposed elevations. So as we noted at the site inspection, if you were standing directly in front of the front elevation of the property, you wouldn't really see the change, but as soon as you move to the side and then further around on the road that we walked around, you would start to read the proposed extension works shown here. And then you'll note on the rear elevation there is proposed to be a window opening on the at 2-storey level on the rear elevation. So the key issues for consideration, as identified within the officer report, are principally around the heritage impacts of the development. One of the main things to bear in mind is that this site is not only within a conservation area, it's within a World Heritage Site. So the consideration of heritage matters is that bit more elevated in terms of what our local policies say and what the National Planning Policy Framework requires us to consider. And there are also concerns about the neighbour relationship with the existing neighbouring property. So for the benefit of those who weren't at the site visit and to refresh for those that were, we've got some photographs now to show you the property as existing. That's the principal elevation facing onto Parkwood Road. Another photo taken from the side and then from the rear garden looking towards the neighbouring property. And more photos showing the rear of the site. This photograph is taken from within the garden, showing the aspect of the terrace road that this property forms part of. This one I have included to better show the relationship between the application site and the existing neighbouring dwelling. So where the proposed extension will come out, there would be a new window at the first floor level where there isn't one at the moment, with the potential for views across to the neighbouring garden. This photograph is taken sort of standing further back from the street that we visited at the site inspection, just so you can see the row of terraces that this forms part of, which, as previously noted, are all marked as buildings that make a positive contribution to the Tavistock Conservation Area. So, in terms of the balance of considerations, as you will sort of see from the list that the case officer has set out for us, there are a number of concerns around the visual impact of the development within the World Heritage Site and the conservation area, and impact on listed buildings within the vicinity, and also the impact on the immediate neighbouring dwelling. There is also concern about drainage, which is more of an insufficient information reason for refusal, which potentially could have been overcome with the submission of further information in terms of how the drainage would be managed, but the principal issues would still be there. So, as following the site inspection, the recommended reasons for refusal have been slightly amended from the original officer report, but the issues are still the same, and the actual recommended wording is as was circulated, and that's now shown here on the slides. As previously advised, my colleague Graham Lawrence is the Heritage Officer who's been looking at this application, so if you've got any specific questions about the heritage concerns on this application, you will have the opportunity to ask those shortly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the planning officer?
Thank you, Chair. I don't have a copy of this new planning. This reasons for refusal, I'm using the ones that were posted to me. Is there a paper copy that I could have? Or I can crank up my computer.
Did others receive it?
Yes.
Was emailed round. Any other questions for the planning officer? Councillor Mann.
Can you just explain to me about the overlooking? I wasn't sure that, I don't understand how that is a material planning consideration, or when that becomes a material planning consideration. So it would just be helpful to understand that.
Okay, so overlooking is a material planning consideration. Policy Dev 1 in particular of the Joint Local Plan talks about the neighbour amenity issues. Amenity is a word that they use to kind of describe the overall kind of loss of privacy, overshadowing those kinds of issues. If I just go back to the drawings just to show what we mean in the context of this application. I just zoom into, I'm just going to zoom into, if you see the application site where it's outlined in red, the application site is outlined in red here, and then this is the nearest neighbouring property here. At the moment, as was noted from the site photos, etc., there's no window at first floor level on the end of this property, and at the moment, this two-storey element of the dwelling doesn't go all the way to the end of the property. So what the application is proposing is to increase the amount of bulk of the dwelling at first floor level and introduce a window onto the end of that elevation. So the amount of sort of the bulk of massing of this property and the potential for overlooking to the neighbouring property is increased compared to how things are at the moment. So when we as officers are looking at neighbour impact issues, the starting point is what is the existing relationship like between the two neighbouring properties? Is there a neighbouring property there at all? There is in this case. And what are the existing sort of degrees of overlooking like? And if there is going to be an impact, what is the significance of that impact? So if it's only going to have quite a modest impact on it, then that's probably not a reason in itself to refuse a planning application. But the more significant the neighbour impact is, the more likely we would say, actually, on balance, if I was sort of thinking about it in terms of sort of how you're trying to explain it to officers when they're first starting out, if you were thinking about buying a house, for example, and that extension to the neighbouring property was already there, would you still buy that house? If the answer is actually no, if that was there, that would stop me from buying that house. That's a bit of a kind of a rough guide as to sort of that's actually quite a significant impact in terms of how things are at the moment to how things would be in terms of the application.
Sorry, just to come back on that. Thank you, that was really helpful. So could you take care of that by having a condition that says you can't have that window? I mean, is that simple or not? I'm just not sure if that's a critical aspect of the refusal.
In some situations, you can overcome potential overlooking issues by use of obscure glazing on windows is a fairly typical way of doing it. Or if you're talking about balconies, then you can put pretty screens up and that kind of thing. But you do need to have a mind to what is the intended use of the room that the window would be serving, and actually, is it really reasonable from the applicant's point of view to say you need to have this window to be obscure glazed? So if it's going to be like the only window that be allowing sort of light into that space, then actually from their point of view, it's not really going to give them what they want, and it's not really reasonable to say you can only have it if it's obscure glazed. So in this situation, I don't think it would be reasonable to say that window needs to be obscure glazed. You can also have conditions to say the window needs to be fixed shut or have a restrictive opener on it so people can't physically look out of them as well. So, I mean, bathroom windows quite typically have those kinds of things on them. But if you're talking about sort of windows that will be serving sort of the main bedroom window or your principal living room window, that's not really appropriate. So it gets to the point where it's either it's okay or it's not.
Councillor Kimber, did you have a question?
Yeah, it seems like it's a fairly technical term in the document, which I think I understand, but I'd just like some clarification. So it says that the proposal, so it's less than substantial harm. I'd quite like somebody to talk about that, if that's okay, please. Thank you.
I think that's probably more of a heritage question in this context. Graham, do you want to step in?
Through you, Chair. Just to clarify, the National Planning Policy Framework identifies levels of harm between less than substantial and substantial. The supplementary planning guidance clarifies that to say that the bar has to be set very high for substantial harm. So in 98% of cases, harm is going to fall into the less than substantial category, and you then have to evaluate it within that spectrum.
Councillor Moody, I think you had a question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got some questions on heritage later, but I want to go back to the overlooking issue. There's currently a window overlooking the next door neighbour's garden now. How is the new window going to exacerbate? Because I'm looking at the plan, the window that's planned is coming from a bedroom.
Okay, so that's the elevations of the property as existing, and I'm on the east elevation, so that's the side elevation that faces towards the neighbour. There is that existing window there, but then on the north, which is the rear elevation, there isn't an existing first floor window on that side, and also in terms of the sort of the massing of the building and in terms of how it's perceived by the neighbouring property. You see it's single storey there, and also it's single storey from that point on there. So when you then come to the proposed elevations. You've got the window there at first floor level where there isn't one there at the moment, and then sort of the bulk and massing that's at first floor level extends further out than it does at the moment. And that's sort of in the context of having a neighbouring property that's actually in quite close proximity to the proposed extension. So if I go back to that one, sort of the neighbouring property is just there. So.
Thank you, Chair. That doesn't answer my question. The question was that there is presently there's a window, a Victorian window in the tenement overlooking the next door neighbour's back garden. And that has existed since they were built. I just want to know, how is a bedroom window going to exacerbate the overlooking issue when there already is an overlooking issue?
So there is an opportunity for overlooking at first floor level at the moment through that existing window, but because there's now going to be another window at first floor level where there isn't one at the moment, there's going to be increased opportunities for overlooking compared to how things are now. And that's sort of where the issue lies, and officers feel that actually sort of that increase is going to be too significant in the context of this site and the neighbouring property. So yeah, we do need to acknowledge that there's potential for overlooking now, but is it going to get any worse, and how significant is that impact going to be? Officers are of the view that yes, there is going to be an increase in overlooking, and it is going to be significant, and that's why the officer recommendation is what it is, but it's for members to now consider.
Thank you. Can I just come back and just ask, the fact that I know that overlooking from different rooms has a different impact. If it were a living room, the overlooking would be substantial because people would be occupying it more. As a bedroom, bedrooms are used differently from living rooms, and I wonder how you categorise that overlooking aspect compared to the current overlooking.
I think it is fair to say that we do have to take into account the use of the room, and as you're right, sort of primary rooms such as the living spaces, which are the ones that are used the most, sort of the overlooking tends to be more of a consideration, whereas with bathroom windows, slightly less so. In this case, because the overlooking is at for sort of first floor level straight into the neighbour's garden, yes, it is a bedroom window, but actually it's going to, the impact on sort of the enjoyment of the neighbouring property officers consider is not going to be acceptable. But yeah, the fact that it's a bedroom window as opposed to a living room window is something to consider.
I think it's a nuanced thing, really. Right, any more questions for the planning officer? Okay, we do have one registered speaker, Felicity MacArthur. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your hand up. Right.
Yeah, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, we're talking about the historical aspect, the heritage aspect, is under 3.0, it says that the building would probably have been associated with the nearby foundry, but there is no evidence of that, connection. And as a result of the probable association, that the World Heritage Management Plan C2 comes into play. I just want to know that unless we've got definite information that it was used in association with the foundry, because we don't have proof, does C2 still apply? Thank you.
Would you like to address that, Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you, Chair. My response to that would be that paragraph 194 of the National Planning Policy Framework expects the applicant to have provided a heritage statement which elucidates the heritage aspects of the application. that wasn't really done here. I would say that the connection with the foundry, you could use the word possible instead of probable, and that would be equally fair. But I would also say that in the absence of certainty, we need to take a precautionary approach, because these buildings do date from the World Heritage Site significance period, although they are at the tail end of it. And as mentioned in the report, the foundry did continue to operate after the high point of the mining boom, but it was there because of the mining activities in the town, and therefore there is a level of connection, certainly, but we can't say for certain what that level of connection is or was.
I've more. The next question is that in the report, the officer report, it states that the row of houses are well preserved, but when we went on the site visit, it was clear that there were a number of changes that were made to a number of the buildings along that way, removal of porches, flat-roofed extensions, etc. I just wanted to, and I would like the conservation officer just to explain the importance of the heritage issue with this particular building in connection with the row, which is described as well preserved. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The term well preserved is largely based on the plan form. Based on the historic mapping, these were a row of identical pairs. What I would say is that all of the alterations that you've referred to occurred prior to the conservation area designation and prior to the World Heritage Site inscription, and therefore limited weight can be given to the relevance of those changes. The application site is a very well preserved example, and the one adjacent to it also has its brick porch, and those are features which would have been on all of the properties. Now, the World Heritage Site Management Plan recognises that over time change has happened to significant buildings within the World Heritage Site, but it also says that opportunities to put back or restore lost features should be explored and looked for. And so I think it says, to put it in simple terms, how many wrongs make a right? They don't in planning terms.
Any more, Councillor Moody?
One more on the homeowner's amenity versus the heritage considerations. How have officers balanced that? Because I understand that if there is a benefit to the homeowner, then that needs to be taken into consideration in deciding planning applications.
Yes, I think that was partially explained at the planning balance slide, but I'll leave the planning officer to elaborate.
So planning permission always runs with the land, not with the applicant or the person who made the application. So essentially, we could grant planning permission for somebody, and we, you know, if we were to take their personal circumstances into account, we could grant somebody planning permission for something, and then they could then sell the site the following day to somebody else, and then that person would have the benefit of the planning permission, and the same personal circumstances may not apply to them. So we don't really consider personal circumstances when considering planning applications, because the planning permission runs with the land. And that's the issue. Obviously, from a personal point of view, we always have kind of sympathies with the applicant and the issues that they face, and making their home appropriate for them. But in terms of what we're allowed and what we can consider in terms of assessing a planning application, we are constrained, I think it's fair to say.
Thank you. That's been.
Any more questions for the planning officer? You do.
And I think it's really important that we fully appreciate the value and the importance of the World Heritage Site in relation to this this proposal. Graham has been involved for a very specific reason, and whilst everyone may want to extend their properties, which is within their right, we need to consider the impact that it may have on the World Heritage Site, and it's and so I think that has a strong weight in the decision making in this case.
As I said, we do have one registered speaker, Felicity McCarter. If you'd like to come up to one of those strange-looking devices. When you're ready, you press the right-hand button and it should light up. Yeah. Please do. In fact, the closer you can get to it, the better. You've got 3 minutes to say what you'd like to the committee, and we will give you a quick reminder when your time is up, and I'll ask you just to round off at that stage. So when you're ready, off you go.
No, I will just tell you that I'm going to speak pretty quickly, just because I want a lot of information to be given. So apologies if I go a bit too fast, but obviously nerves as well is probably going to impact this. Okay, and with the slides, I kind of slightly jump around with the slides in regards to the points that I'm trying to make. So once again, if you have any questions, I can go through those after. Okay, so point 1 in regards to the reference of refusal, NPPF paragraph 16.168, it states that so that it can be enjoyed for their contribution to quality of life, existing and future generations. The works we have carried out in our family home are to contribute to restoring the property, putting in breathable materials such as lime screed floors, lime render on the walls, and to make it breathe, and bring back wooden sash windows. We want this to be our family home for years and generations to come, and this is why we ask for the extension to be possible and would use favourable materials to minimise impact on neighbouring houses. As stated by a planning officer from Cornwall, a small residential extension to the rear of a house which is not highly prominent or visible, the scale and design is suitable for the site and its setting, as shown by image on slide 2. The development would preserve the character and the appearance of the conservation area and have no real impact on the wider World Heritage Site. Why such a difference in opinion? World Heritage Site. As the concern is that you will be able to see the extension from the road, I feel this is a slight push, to be honest. As you can see on slide 3, I've created 2 photos. The difference you can tell me. This would be the difference, a sympathetic approach to a growing family home. From the pre-application, it was advised that the properties along Parkwood Road are symmetrical. This is incorrect, as shown on slide 4. I understand that on the front elevations, we have a variation of vestibules, garage ports, 2-storey extensions, or nothing at all. If something is symmetrical, it has 2 halves, which is exactly the same, except one half is the mirror image of the other, from Collins Dictionary. It is also the same for the back of the properties. Although similar, there is a lot of variation. Single-storey extensions, 2-storey extensions, some with flat roofs and some with pitch roofs. Therefore, the comment about diminishing the simplicity of the original design of the house and resulting in harm to its character and appearance is incorrect and invalid. Please note aerial view of houses on slide 2. Part of the proposal includes replacing the 2-storey wing, which is a slightly larger extension. How is the application, which has been reduced from the pre-app, now called an overbearing addition? I would like you to bring your attention to slide 6, overbearing design. I understand that you will always try to improve on decisions that have been made in the past. However, I feel this is very relevant on the language used in our refusal is over-extravagant and unnecessary. On the refusal, on point 3, the incorrect policy has been used as Dev 3.5 relates to a flood risk. I ask the question, has anyone actually spoken to our neighbours from either side or behind in relation to this extension, referencing Dev 1 policy? As you can see from slide 3, it shows the views from our property to neighbouring gardens and properties. This would not change with the extension requested. We have spoken to neighbours, and as you have had no objections or comments, I believe our conversation is true with them, that they do not have any issues or reason for the extension not to take place. We did not buy this property due to not being overlooked, as we are from every angle, and the same for everyone on the street and behind. All neighbours would have the same privacy as they had before. This whole process of the planning application has been very frustrating from start to now, not only due to the ridiculous timescales, but also the change in the reason for refusal at every stage that we got to a deadline date. Point 4, I would like to object to this refusal, as you can see from the timeline on slide 5, it clearly shows that we tried to ask for advice on whether the FRA report was required, and at an expense of nearly £1,000, we then received confirmation not to go ahead with the said report, which I do have email confirmation for. So then, comments, objection. Once again, please see slide 5 for the communications and provided documentation from South West Water in regards to the flood risk. And also I have a approval from the NFU in regards to this application as well, if you'd like to see it.
Are there any questions for MacArthur? Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to move the recommendation. This in no way suggests what our eventual decision will be, but it simply moves the process from one of questioning to one of debate. So I will move the recommendation for refusal. Can I have a seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Right, we're now in debate committee. We've heard the application, we've questioned the officer, we've questioned the applicant, we've heard from the applicant, had an opportunity to question the applicant. It's now a matter of debate. Has anyone got anything they wish to contribute to the debate before we make a decision? Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. This is a development in a conservation area and a World Heritage Site is very, very difficult, and we've seen lots of examples of applications being approved which probably wouldn't be approved now. But I have an issue with the overlooking problem, the amenity to the neighbouring garden. I also, it seems that the World Heritage Site, I'm totally in favour of the World Heritage Site, the conservation area. It's been one of my interests for many, many years, but sometimes compromises have to be made. I wonder whether if this application were modified in some way, I think that one of the things that stands out to me at the moment is the triangular piece of development at the back on the ground floor. And I take the officer's point of the effect on the appearance of the building from the street, that the side lean-to could be seen as a negative thing. However, I still find it difficult to understand how a rear extension on the tenement, extending the tenement to on the same footprint, how that it would impinge or be greatly detrimental to the heritage asset. Okay, so that's where I'm. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always difficult to balance the merits of an application against the need to consider the significance of the World Heritage Site. We also know that historic and existing examples should not form precedent for allowing an application to proceed. Personally, I feel that the current small extensions to the properties and the existing windows do not have a significant overlooking of the neighbouring properties, while a new window further into the garden and at height would provide the opportunity to intrude on the privacy of the neighbouring gardens. While the extension may sit largely on the same footprint to the rear, there is an increase on the side of the property and an increase in height. On our site visit, there are also very clear views of the extension at the rear of the property from the public realm. Therefore, I will not be supporting the, the other way around, isn't it? I will be supporting the refusal of this application.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'm a fan of very contemporary architecture and a fan of historic architecture. And I think doing the preservation and maintaining heritage sites is incredibly important. from my site visit and looking at the overall aspect from the public realm and the angles that the public realm would perceive this development, from my eye, I don't see it as significant. And I think because of the nature of all of the frontage of those buildings have mostly been changed, and the rears, I think that the heritage impact, although we're saying that all of those other changes predate the heritage status, I'm not sure of the significance. If it was a listed row that had not been changed in a considerable way, I think it'd be a much more obvious refusal. So I'm also a little bit in agreement with the potential for the lean-to on the side perhaps not being ideal, but I think the overall aspect and work in relation to all the other pieces of work on that road don't really merit the refusal in my eyes.
Thank you. So I can't see how the proposal, so we have a requirement to conserve or enhance the outstanding universal value of the site, and I'm worried about the ratchet effect of always allowing minor changes. So I agree that it causes less than substantial harm to the authenticity of the site, so I'll be going with the officer recommendation.
Support the officer's recommendation for refusal. All those for refusal, please show.
Chair.
6. And those against refusal? 1, 2, 3.
That's 4, Chair.
So 6 for refusal, 4 against. The application is refused. Thank you. Right, we move on to the next application, which is 089123. 73B Bannerwell Street. This is brought to the committee principally for the reason that the applicant is an officer of the council, and it is our within our constitution that that's the way we do it. So, without further ado, I will ask Mr. Lawrence, who is going to speak on this application.
Thank you, Chair. We have a fairly straightforward application here at Bannerwell Street, not more than a few hundred yards away from where we're sitting now. This is the site location plan. As usual, here's our Google satellite view. As you can see, it is just north of the viaduct, which is obviously a major vantage point of sites within the town. The proposal is simply to replace an artificial slate roof that was installed probably in the 1990s with a natural slate roof, plus other repairs to the chimneys to alleviate water ingress. There are damp problems with the building. The only reason the application is here at the committee today is because one of the applicants is an employee of the council. Key issues are, of course, the effect on the character and the special interest of the listed building and the setting of others in the vicinity. The question of whether or not the works will preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the Tavistock Conservation Area, and any possible impact on the outstanding universal value of the Cornwall and West Devon mining landscape World Heritage Sites. I've included the elevations just to show that there is actually no change. That is the existing and proposed to the front, the existing and proposed to the rear. Some photographs for those who may not know the site. You can see quite clearly it's the property on the right in this photograph, and this is the roof here. And I took some photographs from the viaduct just so that you could can see how visible the roofscape is from up there. And the officer recommendation is for conditional approval of the application.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Moody.
Of course. Just one question on the, don't have a problem with it whatsoever, except for condition 3. Do we require to have a sample of the slates to be provided as part of the condition?
The reason I'm trying as often as possible to word the condition in that way is that the main reason for the condition is to get a good quality blue-grey natural slate that isn't from a long way away, bearing in mind our climate emergency planning statement. So there is a lot of slate coming in from Brazil and some from China. The reason I don't ask for a sample just as a standard condition is because that requires the applicant to then go through a discharge of condition process, which we have to then treat as if it were another listed building application. We have to advertise it, notify, put it in the paper, put notices up, and that's a cumbersome process which we try to avoid if possible for all parties, just to simplify the process. And so the condition as worded is adequate to secure what we're looking for, in my view.
Any other questions? Okay, as before, I will propose the recommendation for conditional approval. Can I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second that.
Any debate? No debate, in which case we'll go to the vote. Those in favour?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Okay, that's all the planning applications dealt with for today. We now go on to item 6 on the agenda, which is planning appeals update, and I'll ask Mrs. Houselander to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. So there's quite a long list of appeals this time, presumably because we didn't have a committee for a little while. So the first 2 items on the list are just telling us that the appeals have been lodged, so there's no comment to make on those. The third appeal was in relation to application 2808-21 VAR. It was an application, it was a variation of an outline planning permission to approve a change to the proposal which had been made by the applicant without coming back to the planning authority for our approval in relation to drainage. The site, the original outline approval had allowed for drainage to be carried out via soakaways, and then when some percolation testing was carried out on the site, it proved to be not very well draining. So the applicant then decided to use an attenuation tank, which he placed underneath the area of the site, which is, was designated as a car park for the adjacent school. Because of a technical matter in terms of the height needed for the attenuation tank, in order for it to drain freely to the sewer which was in the road, they had to place it at a certain height, which involved increasing the height of the car park above the level of the adjacent development. Once this was discovered through enforcement, we asked them to submit a variation to the outline, which is 2808 21 VAR. That was a variation of another variation, which is commonplace actually, but anyway, in reality, the inspector decided that the height of the car park was not an issue, and if there were concerns about the properties below who had objected to the development, then a fence could be erected of 1 metre high to prevent any headlights shining into the neighbour's property. Just as a sort of point to note, the fact that it has now been allowed is not the detailed. It's another outline on the site rather than a detailed permission. So as a result, the applicant is now going to need to submit, despite the fact that the development is nearly complete, another reserve matters application, because the development that has been built is a reserve matters approval from one of the previous outlines that was on the site. So it's quite an unusual one. So currently the houses and layout and everything that's on the site is effectively unauthorised. So we will be writing to the applicants and expressing that they submit a planning application for reserve matters as soon as possible. The second application from a Mrs. O'Neill was for Widdicombe Barnes. This was the replacement of a mobile home. The mobile home had gained a certificate to indicate that it was that there was residential development on the site, and the application was to replace the mobile home with a house, a two-bedroom house. Unfortunately, in this case, the applicant had decided to place the house some distance away from where the mobile home was located, and therefore the inspector felt that the decision to change the location impacted on policy TTV 29, which is the replacement dwellings policy, and therefore dismissed the appeal. The third application relates to a site in Green Lane, Yelverton, Axtown Lodge. There's a number of applications that have come before this committee in its various guises over the years to add a dwelling on this site, and also sites around about. In this case, the inspector agreed with the planning authority and dismissed the appeal on the basis that it was not in an appropriate location for a new dwelling, and it would change the character of both the landscape and also the area of outstanding natural beauty. The fourth one on the list, which is 156622 FUL, was an application to change the use of an annex to a mixed use of as an annex and as a holiday let, to effectively allow the people of the main house to let it out as holiday lets. Whilst it was refused, the inspector allowed it, feeling that it didn't actually have a negative impact on the landscape or indeed the where it was located. It was already there, and therefore it wasn't an issue in terms of sustainability. And then there's two more, I think. So the next one just indicates that an appeal has been lodged, but the 201622 CLP, which stands for Certificate of Lawfulness, this is quite an interesting one. The applicant felt that a decision made in 2001 to allow for the demolition of some buildings on the site. His argument was that he had allowed for the demolition of all buildings on the site. It was also complicated by the fact that at the time the council owned the land and the buildings, which isn't complicated by that, it just was a matter of fact. And interestingly, the inspector reviewed it on the basis that do you have to rely solely on the planning report and the planning decision, or can you actually also consider the documents that are associated that have been submitted as well? So could you consider the fact that there were 3 applications on that site at the same time, one for listed building consent, one for conservation area consent, and one for to demolish, and one for planning permission? The conservation area consents no longer exist. They are not an application we have anymore. You have to have planning permission to demolish anything in a conservation area. So he referred in his response to a couple of court cases elsewhere in the country, and concluded that actually, taking into account all of the documents submitted, that the application only permitted the demolition of certain buildings and not all of them. So that's an interesting one, just in terms of case law. And then the final appeal, which we've had a decision on, is the 072321 FUL. It's an application by Baker Estates, and it was the original application for the Plymouth Road site, which, not the original, there was an original outline. This was a subsequent application on part of the site for 44 houses and 0.76 hectares of commercial land, the applicant has subsequently gained planning permission for the 44 houses and an extra care facility on the site, and the appeal has in fact been dismissed. No, it's been allowed, sorry. It's been allowed, which means that, in essence, the applicant has 2 permissions on that site now.
Can I just come back on a matter of policy on the 2016, the listed chimney application. If someone knocks down a building without planning permission, subsequently puts in planning permission, and that planning permission is not granted, but the buildings have been knocked down, are they required to put them back?
No. In theory, yes. In theory, you would be required to put them back, but I think there is also an issue here with the condition of the buildings, all of the remaining buildings, and indeed those buildings. So building control, I think, were involved in that process, and I think they would argue that even the existing buildings on the site, bar the chimney, are in quite a poor state of repair. So it would be not expedient, if you like, to continue with that.
So it's a matter of principle rather than practicality.
Yeah, I mean, if it was a very, I guess if it was in a situation where it was in good condition, all the other buildings were, then yes, we would want them to rebuild it.
Okay, thank you. That's the man.
Yeah, can I just ask a question about the Baker Estates appeal and how we can track, obviously that's in Tavistock itself, how we can track the progress of which application is moving forward, or how that happens?
Well, we think we can be in communication with the developer to understand whether they're pursuing one or the other. The other way, if the developer refused to communicate with us about it, the other way we would be able to do it would be via the discharge of conditions. So when an application to discharge any of the conditions on either one of the consents comes through, we would know then which permission they are implementing. I don't think, I think we have a reasonable relationship with the developer, so I don't think that would be, I think we will know which one they choose to pursue.
Councillor Leach.
Of the 2, are we looking at 106 for both, just in case, or is it a specific one from a 106 point of view we'll be asking them to sign up to?
So the appeal decision, the applicant submitted a unilateral undertaking, committing to lots of, I'll put them down here. Yeah, committing to lots of things. Where is it? So the Tamar SAC contribution, healthcare contributions, management of future open space, marketing of the commercial development, implementation of off-site highway works, provision towards education, and a provision towards the rail reinstatement scheme. That was submitted with the appeal and therefore sits with that planning permission that the appeal is allowed. The other application equally has the section 106, which sits with it.
Does that include the care home?
The application, the other application was specifically for the extra care facility, yes. This one doesn't, no. This one is for commercial development and 44 houses.
Okay. All done on appeals. We move on to item 7 on the agenda, major applications. This is for us to note, but if there are any particular questions the committee have for the planning team, now's a good time to ask them. I have one conundrum to pose to the planning officer, and that is on the second page. It's probably a typo, but 4083 says outline application, some matters reserved for up to 25 dwellings, including 30 affordable dwellings. Not quite sure how the mathematics works there.
No, I think that is actually a typo. Apologies for that. I'll get that sorted for next time.
Okay. Any other questions on majors at this stage? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the Management Development and Licensing Committee. Thank you very much. Stop the live stream.